This is our high-speed rail project.
This was a proposal in our January budget to add additional resources at the Department of General Services Real Estate Division associated with the workload related to the increased workload related to the right-of-way and other real estate services that are needed by the high-speed rail system.
And Ms. Christine.
Support the Assembly version here.
So the Assembly approved this as budgeted. The Senate approved this on a limited term basis, and we're recommending the Assembly approach. We think the workload will likely last for several years, well, not indefinitely, probably longer than a limited term position.
I'm sorry, Ms. Christine, again, you're concerned with the Senate proposal?
It wasn't a specific concern. It was more that we do think that the workload will probably last for several years. So it's beyond a typical limited term position. In terms of the funding proposal, my understanding is the Senate was proposing funding the position, basically having limited term funding. It's likely if that were to be the direction the legislature wanted to go, that the department would probably have to come back to the legislature for potentially additional funding. That's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but it's likely that funding will be needed beyond a limited term basis.
Is the question of whether high-speed rail is a permanent or limited term project germane to this conversation?
Perhaps, however, I think typically in terms of limited term versus permanent positions, or in this case funding authority because of the new way that the administration is looking at positions, I think we've typically looked at positions as if they're kind of over 2 years, we've thought of them as permanent positions, maybe 3 years maybe in some cases, but typically 2 to 3 years. And if they're less than that, we've thought of them as limited term. So in this case, that's why we didn't raise an issue with it being permanent, not because we think that the project will last indefinitely, but simply because it's likely that these property acquisitions will last more than 2 or 3 years.
Given that we are in the Department of General Services, as was mentioned, this is specifically for right-of-way acquisition. Over the term of the many years of the project itself, I would imagine the right-of-way acquisition is front-loaded, or not necessarily?
I believe that's typically the case. However, it can take several years to acquire properties, and there's also different segments of the high-speed rail project as well. So if the full project is completed as currently planned, there will likely be property acquisition that will last for a number of years.
Ms. Bosler, you would agree?
And we agree with that, yes. We're very deep into the right-of-way acquisition part of the high-speed rail project, and we do anticipate that it will continue for the next several years as we get all of the land in place in order to construct the high-speed rail.
Mr. Chair, with that, I'd like to move the Assembly version.
All right, you've made your case. Thank you. We have a motion for the Assembly version on the Senate side, 2-1, and on the Assembly side, 2-1. Sticking with the Department of General Services on page 17, we're dealing with surplus property inventory.
Yes, this was some trailer bill language. I believe that some language was inadvertently deleted from the code last year related to agricultural districts associations and their requirement that they report real property information to DGS. Some of you may not know, but those local fairs are state properties, and they are part of the state inventory. So we had this trailer bill language, and I believe that the difference is that the Senate added to this with some other policy interests. So we support the Assembly.
Thank you, Ms. Bosler and Ms. Christine.
But sorry, and just one thing. I do know that there's been active discussions about this language, and I think that we would like to continue to work on the language because I think there's a good compromise coming together.
Very good. So your take, and then is there the likelihood of a compromise? Should we hear from LAO?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as was indicated, the Assembly approved this as budgeted. The Senate added, so approved this budgeted, but also added some language that would require a property disposition plan when a surplus property was brought forward. So our office, we feel that the intent of this additional language that the Senate has put forward is certainly a valuable one, that legislative oversight over the surplus property process is important. However, we would just raise for the committee's consideration whether it's most appropriate to consider it under the budget process, or if there is additional time, it could be considered over the policy process. And to the extent it's considered in the budget process, we have some potential suggestions we could provide throughout the process as the language is further refined.
Thank you. It traditionally would be your position to support additional legislative engagement.
That's absolutely correct. And I think in this case, there's actually quite a bit of authority that's been delegated through the surplus property process to the administration. So it's certainly appropriate for the legislature to take an additional role in having additional oversight and information brought forward from the administration when these properties are proposed to be surplused.
Thank you. Senator Nielsen.
I just assert that language is very important for us to review. It's very significant to the areas that we represent, so our oversight, I think, is really critical. We do need to see the language.
Senator Nielsen will take your advice and come back to this, and maybe with the hope that we'll find a compromise. Page 18 is statewide disability access.
Turn this over to my colleague, Mr. Fitzpatrick, to introduce this issue.
Mr. Fitzpatrick, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Tom Fitzpatrick, Department of Finance. This BCP was approved in both houses, but trailer bill language was
Mr.
added.
Fitzpatrick, I hate to cut you off. We have word that we need to get to the floor to cast a vote. So excuse our rudeness. Feel free to make yourself comfortable until we return. We shouldn't be too long at all, and I'm sorry for the interruption.
No problem.
And
Sure, we'll have to do one too.
we will come back and proceed to finish this section as quickly as possible. Thank you for your indulgence.
Home front and brag about how many times my name was mentioned. As I was indicating, both chambers passed this BCP, which is related to the extension of resources for disability access compliance. The difference in conference is some trailer bill that the Assembly put in place, and my understanding is that that's been modified, and we have seen it, and the administration does not have any objections with it.
Very good. And Ms. Kirstein, do you want to walk us through that compromise?
Absolutely. So essentially, there was some language, a reporting requirement that's in current statute, and basically that reporting requirement it relates to local governments. So local governments who collect are authorized under the law to collect a $1 charge on business licenses, and then they're allowed to retain 70 cents, and they're supposed to remit 30 cents to the state. So when that was put into place, there was a reporting requirement on those locals to report back to the state how much they were collecting, how much they were remitting to the state, and what they were using the funds for. So the Assembly trailer bill had actually repealed that reporting requirement. Our understanding is that the compromise approach would retain the reporting requirement, but instead of the reports coming to the budget committees as they currently as currently is happening, they'll come to the Department of General Services, which I think is perhaps better positioned to receive all of those reports. So we understand that everyone seems to be in agreement on the compromise.
Thank you. And Mr. Fitzpatrick, does that mean you have to read those reports?
I believe I don't, but time will tell.
All right.
Is that a wish or a fact?
So we do have the conference compromise. Assemblywoman Weber.
Remove the compromise.
Okay. Senator Nielsen, we have a motion for the conference compromise for the page 18 statewide disability access program. 3-0. And we'll keep it open for the Assembly. Page 19, California Arts Council. Ms. Bosler.
The May revision provided ongoing augmentation of $5 million to the Arts Council for the various programs that the Arts Council does to support the arts around the state of California.
And let me say we are very pleased with the administration, specifically with the governor, for investing the $5 million that we, as a legislature, had put in last year. And I just want to point out that, amazingly, though California is the entertainment capital of the world, we rank not only 50th among 50 states in per capita support for arts education. I'm told we rank behind Guam. So we're actually 51st in the nation, despite the fact that every study shows that students who benefit from art and music education test better in math and in science. They have higher self-esteem. They have lower rates of dropping out of school. And we're still struggling to invest. So I think this is a good step forward. I think prior to the dot-com bust, we were investing around 38 million general fund dollars for the California Arts Council, which does invest in school and community-based organizations, arts education programs. So this is a good step in a very positive direction. Ms. Kirstein.
So just to summarize the actions of the different committees, the Assembly approved the governor's proposal for that $5 million in additional ongoing funding, but also approved 2 additional positions at $144,000 on an ongoing basis. The Senate also approved the $5 million that was proposed by the governor, but added another $5 million for a total of $10 million of ongoing general fund for this program. So we basically feel as an office that this is a matter of priorities, and so the legislature will just want to consider whether this is, this within the larger context of all the general fund programs.
Sure. Thank you for that, Ms. Kirstein. And these 2 positions you think could serve some value?
We understand that the positions are anticipated to be involved in grant management and review. We haven't done an in-depth workload analysis on them at this point.
Very good. So the difference between the houses, the 2 positions, which cost $144,000, and then the $5 million additional that the Senate put in, potentially we could find some sweet spot in between. Senator Nielsen.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to at least give it a try. For many years, you're right, the Arts Council budget, having been around $40 million, was only $1 million. And, they did their part. They went out and got the license plate program going, and they worked with the local agencies. They've done their part to help, including the tax credit checkoff, or the tax checkoff, and that gave them a measly little bit. Last year, a step forward was taken, and this can be another step forward. But I want to give them some credit. An area where you and I are very concerned and tuned in, and that is corrections. And there used to be a pretty robust arts and corrections program in California, and that is a key element in rehabilitation of some of the inmates. And that went to heck. Well, the Arts Council has gone to work on their own with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to get some of those programs going again, and some of the revenue that we've provided will, in fact, do that. That's very significant. And in addition, they're working with the veterans organizations, and those are very good needs. So I'd like to kind of reward them if we could, maybe, because working with you, Mr. Chairman, your leadership, maybe we could bump that up about to 7 from 5. Where it would be understood that the governor's commitment of 5 is an ongoing, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, the governor's commitment. Then the 2 would be above that, and that would help them with their staffing position.
Terrific. So Senator Nielsen suggesting we might meet the Assembly about halfway, $7 million plus the $144,000 for the 2 positions. And if my math is correct, that will get us closer to about, let's see, $1 would, 10% would be $3.80. So we're on our way. Just give it some national context. New York State's $5 per capita. I think Minnesota is close to $4 per capita. So we've got a long ways to go, but this is a great step in that direction. So Assemblyman Blue, I know you've been
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This isn't quite reminiscent of last year where we started to have a bidding war because I think this is very popular, and I appreciate the compromise. I think it's a good idea, and I hope that my colleagues from the Republican Party are looking at all the departments and those that are performing well, thinking about rewarding them in the same way. But I think this is a good compromise, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Assemblyman.
So I move the compromise.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. We have our compromise moved, and that would be 3-0 on the Senate side and 3-0 on the Assembly side. And Ms. Bosler, I'm sure you would be in agreement if you could convey our thanks to the governor. And also, I can't tell you the kinds of smiles I see in my district, and I'm sure I'm not alone, when organizations receive a grant from the California Arts Council. It's a day to celebrate. And the numbers of children and students that we benefit is going to grow as a result of this action. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Just clearly, as we work towards a final compromise, the additional money above the $5 million would just be a matter of priorities and how those sort out.
So noted. Thank you. Thank you. Page 20 is support of the Historic State Capitol Commission. And that was a Senate proposal. Ms. Kirstein.
So as you indicated, this was a Senate proposal. The Senate adopted budget bill language to establish the Historic State Capitol Fund for support of the Historic State Capitol Commission. The governor didn't have a proposal in this area, and the Assembly didn't take action. We feel that the intent seems reasonable, but we don't have sufficient information at this time to fully assess the proposal's merits.
We move the acceptance of the Senate proposal.
All right, so we do have a motion for the Senate. And just to point out, this creates a new fund. The only difference between the houses was the budget bill language. So we create a fund that could be filled with either non-state, public or private sources. And it would be for the purpose of maintaining the Capitol building and the grounds around it. That's our motion. Senate version. Senate is 3-0. Assembly, 3-0. Moving on to the Commission on State Mandates, funded and suspended local government mandates, in this case, election mandates. This was the administration's proposal. Ms. Bosler.
In the January budget, numerous mandates were suspended. Many have been suspended for many years, and many more since 2011. These specific mandates that are subject to this item are 8 election mandates, 2 of which have been suspended since 2002, and the remaining have been suspended since 2011. We continue to maintain that the suspension of these mandates is warranted to save the general fund. I will note that many of the underlying statutes that are proposed to be suspended are part of best practices and are part of the core responsibilities of local election officials. I would also note that local governments, counties specifically, will be receiving a significant portion of the $765 million in back payments that will be made in the coming month. And then also just ongoing, the dissolution of redevelopment has resulted in significant ongoing monies for counties that could also be put towards augmenting these election purposes.
Thank you for reminding us of the $765 million. It's not a small amount of money. Mr. Euler.
Yes, thank you. So just recapping the two House's actions, the Assembly adopted the governor's proposals to suspend the mandates, which would essentially make county compliance with the requirements of those mandates optional. The Senate approved funding of $76 million to pay for the backlog of claims on those mandates, and in doing so would keep those mandates that would require counties to follow out those mandates. It wouldn't be optional. We have in the past and continue to have issues with the suspension of the elections mandates. While we recognize that the mandates have been suspended for a few years now, and we haven't heard any reported cases of counties deciding not to carry out the activities because they're voluntary, there still continues to be some risk that in, say, a future economic downturn, counties facing revenue declines might look at these types of activities and know that they're voluntary and consider not carrying them out. And this can specifically be an issue in some statewide elections where you have districts that can overlap county boundaries. So you might have one county that's carrying out specific procedures and another county within the same district that isn't carrying out those procedures. It can, even just one instance could sort of bring questions to the integrity of the election. And for that reason, we recommend the Senate's version, which is to fund the mandates.
Ms. Bosler, I commend the governor for being bold and attempting to tighten the reins and to save general fund dollars where possible. I'm very mixed on this. I'm happy to hear what my colleagues have to say about it. I'm glad to hear from Mr. Euler that most counties are following these practices as best practices, whether the state's reimbursing them or not. I know that we have to make this decision in the context of our historic low voter turnout. Now, there are probably many reasons for that. A lot of voters are disaffected right now, all of the huge sums of money in our election system, people feeling as if their voice doesn't matter because it's just a handful of billionaires who are running the show at this point. So there are many reasons for the low turnout. I have to ask, do we have concern that this will either further depress voter turnout or not have an impact, that there are other things that we need to be doing? And I know the Secretary of State is looking at a variety of ways to get more people registered and ballots into more hands. Just wanted to hear if you have any thoughts on that.
Certainly voter registration is something that we've been discussing significantly related to the DMV system, and currently everyone who goes to the DMV has the option of signing a voter registration form. There is discussion about making that even more easy than it currently is, making it even more user-friendly. So that's one way that we're trying to improve voter registration. I think that the counties have a significant discretion for how they run their elections. Certainly within they still have the Federal Voting Act requirements that they must comply with. And so I don't believe that the funding specifically of these mandates, I don't think we can really say whether it will increase turnout or not, because I think these resources are really about funding which funding, okay, I'm going to go back and talk a little bit about the mandates process, because it's really that's really underpins all of this. And the mandates have been long discussed. The mandates process has been long discussed as really a troublesome process. Of course, it is a constitutionally based process that we have when the legislature and the governor pass laws that cause increased costs at the county level. This is the recourse that counties have to recover those costs, and that's absolutely mandated by the Constitution. But there's significant discrepancy about how each county sees these new mandates. Some of them would say, well, we're already doing that, and that's just our process. Others will file very detailed claims. So there really is a lot of fairness issues in how the mandate system is applied. And we do think that all of these underlying statutes are part of best practices. In the advent of a vote by mail, which is popular practice in many areas of the state. There has been increased utilization of vote by mail as one option for voting, not the only option, but one option. And those programs tend to save costs. So we think that there's enough monies at the local levels to maintain good, solid voting systems, and so that we don't think this mandate money necessarily is necessary. Not to mention that counties have significant one-time and ongoing resources that have been freed up for general purposes. Clearly, voting and running fair elections is one of the core responsibilities that those county election registrars have.
I'm just going to follow up on some of your comments. Clearly, the relationship between the state and the county is one of an auxiliary body working with the state to provide basic services to our citizens. And a lot of the governor's work in recent years has been about returning control to local governments as opposed to having the state dictate to them how they should conduct their own business. With regard to something as important as voting, I do believe that these are best practices, that we are hearing from both Department of Finance and the LAO that they're likely already in place, whether they're being reimbursed or not, and that if a county, even in tough times, and counties go through tough times just as the state goes through tough times, should a county find itself debating what to do, I think an appropriate process is for those county boards of supervisors in a public process, which they would of course have to follow, hear from public comment from those in those counties. If they even suggested that they were not going to fulfill these kinds of services, and let those decisions be made at the local level. So I'm going to be supporting this today, the assembly version. And again, not without some reservation, but with confidence that this is the appropriate way to be moving. Senator Nielsen and then Senator Lara.
Mr. Chairman, I just have to, argue we've got to really worry about the integrity of the process, though. And if we were going to look to places to suspend mandates, this is not where I'd start. There are some real significant areas of mandates that could tremendously help the economy. And some of the things that are being done with the intent of enhancing the voter turnout are greatly exacerbating the opportunities for voter fraud. Even in terms of registration, that is so. I'm very concerned about the mandate issue, just to walk away from.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lara.
Thank you. This question is for the LAO. You said most counties are following these best practices. Are there counties that are not following?
As I said, we haven't heard any reports of counties not carrying out the mandated activities.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Euler. Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've not had any reports, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? I mean, it's just that you've not heard directly from them, correct?
I suppose I can't say with 100% certainty that all counties are carrying out these activities. I think it's fair to say that if a county weren't carrying out these activities, it probably would have been I think news of that probably would have reached the state level. It probably would have been a significant decision made by those counties.
Well, I also appreciate the governor's prudence in reviewing the budget and trying to tighten it a bit, although I would have to agree with Senator Nielsen that this is probably not the place we would want to do that. The integrity of elections is hugely important to all of us, no matter one's political party. And I will remind everyone, if you were not aware, that former Secretary of State Deborah Bowen, her comment about suspending these was that she said, it removes a critical method to prevent voter fraud. This is our former Secretary of State saying this. And I think if we assume that every county is doing this anyway. I think that would be foolish regardless of any reports. We know that many counties have had to scale back in their expenses, much like the state, and we cannot assume that they're all doing this regardless of the state funding it. I think it's horribly irresponsible for us to not have these mandates taken care of, and I would ask that the members of this conference committee consider that when making your decision. Thank you.
I just wanted to refine my comments a little bit. The two largest mandates of the 11 or of the 7 that are proposed for suspension are related to the provision of absentee ballots. And really, absentee ballots are part of a normal voting procedures in all counties. And in our research, actually, can be a more cost-effective way for counties to manage their voting by having a mix of the absentee and then a more limited number of polling places. The amount of polling places is very strictly regulated by state law, but there is some flexibility, and to the extent that some more people are voting by absentee and permanent absentee, there would be savings to be invested in other parts of the election infrastructure that ensure fair elections.
Assemblywoman Weber.
Yes, this is the 50th anniversary, or is it the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. And so while we've, as the Assembly, agree with this because we have in the past, I guess, and it is a savings, it is one of concern, and to me personally, as well as many others, voting is fundamental. And so we've agreed to accept this proposal by the governor to basically suspend these mandates. But what ought to happen, our thinking is that there should also be a working group that begins to look at this in terms of Department of Finance, as well as others, in terms of what's really going on with our voting and the financing of it. We constantly layer on these expectations and these mandates, and we need to find out whether or not they're working, whether or not they're effective, whether or not we're getting the results that we want. But I don't, I have some mixed feelings, obviously, because I never want to do freedom on the cheap, because that always ends up in a whole lot of other stuff that I don't like. And so sometimes I pay a little bit more for my freedoms than people think are logical, simply because they're just that valuable. And I can't put a price on voting for somehow reason. No matter how I try to add and subtract, I can't put a price on it. But, there may be better ways of doing what we're doing. We may be expending resources in areas that we shouldn't, and basically having little or no effect on individuals. And we oftentimes don't go back and look at it. At one time, we can end up with an issue that we create a mandate for because it's small and it's localized, and then we apply it, and then it really goes away or doesn't have any effect at all, and we still have this mandate there that people have to do certain things in their communities that move far beyond that. Voting is changing in terms of polls versus absentee versus something else versus more than one day to vote. A whole lot of things are coming to play now that we need to look at. So I would be supportive of continuing with the Assembly's recommendation and in support of the governor's recommendation, with the idea that we also would like to have as part of if we need trailer bill language, to talk about a working group to really get a handle on the voting mandates to see whether or not they're effective in terms of us accomplishing what we think ought to be access and opportunity for people to be able to vote. But I think I don't want us to give the impression that we walk away from these mandates as if we've solved all our problems, because we really have not.
Assemblywoman, I'm thinking the exact thoughts that you are, and I wanted to see if both Finance and LAO could give me your thoughts on some supplemental reporting language which would require, and I'm not sure which entity it might be, Department of Finance, to report back to us regularly, annually, so that we can determine that our counties are continuing to follow these best practices. So as the Assemblywoman just said, we're not walking away from this. We want to keep an eye on it. If we found a year or two, 3 from now, after a couple of election cycles, that in fact counties were dropping these best practices, I think we would want to come back and reconsider reinstating these mandates. But it's a good, it's a fiscally wise step to be taking, especially in light of Mr. Euler's comments that we don't know of any counties that aren't doing this. But if we found through this annual report that changed, we would definitely be potentially interested in changing our position that we're holding today. So that's reasonable, and how would we, who would be responsible for that reporting language?
We would be happy to continue discussions about what makes the most sense. I'd have to think about it and go back to our folks on that.
Sounds good.
Mr. Sisney, I bet you have a thought on this.
One thing to add, supplemental reporting language is good just for that year. So if it really is an annual reporting requirement,
and it's a TBL.
Another vehicle would probably be preferable.
So trailer bill language then? So
That would be one option.
All right. Well, then, I would then suggest that we add to the motion of the Assembly version trailer bill language that would have, you name the entity, have reports back to the legislature determining counties that may no longer be following these best practices.
The implementation of the mandates.
The implementation of these mandates as they are currently.
Okay.
It would be, as Mr. Sisney's recommendation, trailer bill language, so it would be in statute. Any other questions from the committee? All right, so that is the motion. I imagine it's 2-1 on the Senate side and 2-1 on the Assembly side. Page 21, Assembly with TBL reporting language to the legislature on compliance of the mandates, former mandates.
This is the last item for this.
And I'd like to return to page 18 very quickly. The motion was the conference compromise. We had a 3-0 vote on the Senate side, and just want to confirm a 3-0 vote on the Assembly side.
Bloom? Bloom, yes. Melendez?
3-0?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Did you move the Assembly?
18, yes.
Page 18, there's a conference compromise.
We did move the Assembly a minute ago. They assume you were 2-1. Okay. Get up on 18. Okay. See if we can get to these in a few minutes because we have to go to the floor.
Okay. And just to clarify, the compromise was that the report goes to Mr. Fitzpatrick at the Department of General Services.
The elections?
Statewide Disability Access Program.